ale, and pouring out 2 glasses, proposed a toast. "Here's to him," he said, lifting his glass, "and may he teach 'em a lesson, earls and markises and dukes and all." After that night the two saw each other often, and Mr. Hobbs was much more comfortable and less desolate. They read the Penny Story Gazette and many other interesting things, and gained a knowledge of the habits of the nobility and gentry which would have surprised those despised classes if they had realized it. One day Mr. Hobbs made a pilgrimage to a bookstore down town, for the express purpose of adding to their library. He went to the clerk and leaned over the counter to speak to him. "I want," he said, "a book about earls." "What!" exclaimed the clerk. "A book," repeated the groceryman, "about earls." "I'm afraid," said the clerk, looking rather queer, "that we haven't what you want." "Haven't?" said Mr. Hobbs anxiously. "Well, say markises, then, or dukes." "I know of no such book," said the clerk. Mr. Hobbs was much disturbed. He looked down on the floor. Then he looked up. "None about female earls?" he inquired. "I'm afraid not," said the clerk with a smile. "Well," exclaimed Mr. Hobbs, "I'll be jiggered!" He was just going out of the store when the clerk called him back and asked if a story in which the nobility were chief characters would do. Mr. Hobbs said it would, if he could get an entire volume devoted to earls. So the clerk sold him a book called The Tower of London, written by Mr. Harrison Ainsworth, and he carried it home. When Dick came they began to read it. It was a very wonderful and exciting book, and the scene was laid in the reign of the famous English queen who is called by some people Bloody Mary. And as Mr. Hobbs heard of Queen Mary's deeds, and the habit she had of chopping people's heads off, putting them to the torture, and burning them alive, he became very much excited. He took his pipe out of his mouth and stared at Dick, and at last he was obliged to mop the perspiration from his brow with his red pocket handkerchief. "Well, he ain't safe," he said. "He ain't safe. If the women folks can sit up on their thrones and give the word for things like that to be done, who's to know what's happening to him at this very minute? He's no more safe than nothing. Just like a woman like that get mad, and no one's safe." "Well," said Dick, though he looked rather anxious himself, "you see, this 'ere 'un isn't the one that's bossin' things now. I know her name's Victory, and this 'un here in the book, her name's Mary." "So it is," said Mr. Hobbs, still mopping his forehead, "so it is. And the newspapers are not sayin' anything about any racks, thumbscrews, or stake burnin's, but still it doesn't seem as if 'twas safe for him over there with those queer folks. Why, they tell me they don't keep the 4th of July." He was privately uneasy for several days, and it was not until he received Fauntleroy's letter, and had read it several times, both to himself and to Dick, and had also read the letter Dick got around the same time, that he became composed again. But they both found great pleasure in their letters. They read and reread them, and talked them over, and enjoyed every word of them. And they spent days over the answers they sent, and read them over almost as often as the letters they had received. It was rather a labor for Dick to write his. All his knowledge of reading and writing he had gained during a few months when he had lived with his elder brother, and had gone to a night school. But being a sharp boy, he had made the most of that brief education, and had spelled out things in newspapers since then, and practiced writing with bits of chalk on pavements or walls or fences. He told Mr. Hobbs all about his life, and about his elder brother, who had been rather good to him after their mother died, when Dick was quite a little fellow. Their father had died some time before. The brother's name was Ben, and he had taken care of Dick as well as he could until the boy was old enough to sell newspapers and run errands. They had lived together, and as he grew older, Ben had managed to get along until he had quite a decent place in a store. "And then," exclaimed Dick with disgust, "blest if he didn't go and marry a gal! Just went and got spoony and hadn't any more sense left. Married her and set up housekeeping in 2 back rooms. And a hefty 'un she was, a regular tiger cat. She'd tear things to pieces when she got mad, and she was mad all the time. Had a baby just like her, yelled day and night, and if I didn't have to tend it, and when it screamed she'd fire things at me. She fired a plate at me one day and hit the baby, cut its chin. Doctor said he'd carry the mark till he died. Nice mother she was. Cracky. But didn't we have a time, Ben and meself, and the young un. She was mad at Ben because he didn't make money faster, and last he went out west with a man to set up a cattle ranch, and hadn't been gone a week 'fore one night I got home from sellin' my papers, and the rooms was locked up and empty, and the woman of the house, she told me Mina'd gone shown a clean pair o' heels. Some one else said she'd gone across the water to be nuss to a lady as had a little baby too. Never heard a word of her since, nuther has Ben. If I'd 'a' been him I would 'a' fretted a bit, and I guess he didn't. But he thought a heap o' her at the start. Tell you he was spoons on her. She was a daisy lookin' gal too, when she was dressed up and not mad. She'd big black eyes and black hair down to her knees. She'd make it into a rope as big as your arm and twist it round and round her head, and I tell you her eyes 'ud snap. Folks used to say she was part Italian. Said her mother or father'd come from there, and it made her queer. I tell you she was one of 'em, she was." He often told Mr. Hobbs stories of her and of his brother Ben, who, since his going out west, had written once or twice to Dick. Ben's luck had not been good, and he had wandered from place to place, but at last he had settled on a ranch in California, where he was at work at the time when Dick became acquainted with Mr. Hobbs. "That gal," said Dick one day, "she took all the grit out o' him. I couldn't help feelin' sorry for him sometimes." They were sitting in the store doorway together, and Mr. Hobbs was filling his pipe. "He oughtn't to have married," he said solemnly, as he rose to get a match. "Women, I never could see any use in 'em myself." As he took the match from its box, he stopped and looked down on the counter. "Why," he said, "if here isn't a letter! I didn't see it before. The postman must have laid it down when I wasn't noticin', or the newspaper slipped over it." He picked it up and looked at it carefully. "It's from him!" he exclaimed. "That's the very one it's from." He forgot his pipe altogether. He went back to his chair quite excited, and took his pocket knife and opened the envelope. "I wonder what news there is this time," he said. And then he unfolded the letter and read as follows: "Dorincourt Castle. My dear Mr. Hobbs, I write this in a great hurry, because I have something curious to tell you. I know you will be very much surprised, my dear friend, when I tell you. It is all a mistake, and I'm not a lord, and I shall not have to be an earl. There is a lady which was married to my Uncle Beavis, who is dead, and she has a little boy, and he is Lord Fauntleroy, because that is the way it is in England. The earl's eldest son's little boy is the earl if everybody else is dead. I mean if his father and grandfather are dead. My grandfather is not dead, but my Uncle Beavis is, and so his boy is Lord Fauntleroy. And I am not, because my papa was the youngest son, and my name is Cedric Errol, like it was when I was in New York. And all the things will belong to the other boy. I thought at first I should have to give him my pony and cart, but my grandfather says I need not. My grandfather is very sorry, and I think he does not like the lady, but perhaps he thinks Dearest and I are sorry because I shall not be an earl. I would like to be an earl now better than I thought I would at first, because this is a beautiful castle, and I like everybody so, and when you are rich you can do so many things. I am not rich now, because when your papa is only the youngest son he is not very rich, and I'm going to learn to work, so that I can take care of Dearest. I have been asking Wilkins about grooming horses. Perhaps I might be a groom or a coachman. The lady brought her little boy to the castle, and my grandfather and Mr. Havisham talked to her. I think she was angry. She talked loud, and my grandfather was angry too. I never saw him angry before, and I wish it did not make them all mad. I thought I would tell you and Dick right away, because you would be interested. So no more at present. With love, from your old friend, Cedric Errol, not Lord Fauntleroy." Mr. Hobbs fell back in his chair. The letter dropped on his knee, his penknife slipped to the floor, and so did the envelope. "Well," he ejaculated, "I am jiggered!" He was so dumbfounded that he actually changed his exclamation. It had always been his habit to say, "I will be jiggered," but this time he said, "I am jiggered." Perhaps he really was jiggered, there is no knowing. "Well," said Dick, "the whole thing's bust up, hasn't it?" "Bust!" said Mr. Hobbs. It's my opinion it's a put up